my identity in that, certainly what I would consider a more metaphysical sense, is far deeper and even to some extent unknown than just names I can say about myself. I know I've just told you that you should kind of, in some sense, define what kind of writer you are by looking at your interests, by looking at your genre and forms, or more specifically by looking at famous writers whose form and genre you like. So in some sense I've told you to calcify your writing identities to help you tell you what it is you should write. If you can kind of label yourself, it can tell you, if I'm the kind of person that likes cats and Kurt Vonnegut, I should be writing postmodern fiction about cats. However, I'm going to get a little philosophical here. I guess I've been doing that the whole time. But I don't think, generally speaking, it's a good idea to talk about your identity as a static thing. The word identity is one of the great buzzwords of our time, but it's used in a kind of political sphere and all the political discourse, right wing and left wing, in a very particular kind of way. We're really talking about a kind of personal self-identification, the words we use to say about ourselves. But if we're talking about philosophy, or more specifically metaphysics, identity is a much broader concept than that. My identity in that, certainly what I would consider a more metaphysical sense, is far deeper and even to some extent unknown than just names I can say about myself. I'm a son, I'm a man, I'm Australian, and so on. These are actually really surface level, to some extent, elements of identity. My identity, I'm going to get very technical here for a second. The way that my metaphysics professor taught me what identity means in the philosophical sense is that something's identity is that to which it is identical. The identity of an apple is everything about the apple, the appleness of the apple that makes it apple and not something else. Its position in space-time, its color, its taste, where it came from, its what its parents were, even perhaps who eats it. Your identity is everything you could possibly want to divulge as information to give people the impression of what that thing is. And so my identity as a person might include things like my race, my country of origin, that I'm a son, that I'm a friend, that I'm an artist or a writer. But frankly, my identity is mostly unconscious to me. I don't really know what I am. Putting labels on my identity seems like maybe helpful in certain situations. I don't think it does a good job of capturing who I am at a fundamental level. Most of my psyche is unconscious. There's another element of my psyche that's maybe partially conscious. If you think about what's happening inside your mind at any given moment, often what we have is an internal monologue or even dialogue. You'll notice that you have multiple voices who all want different things. They're all James. And they're competing with each other to determine what judgment I'm going to make. Yeah, I'm going to eat the burger because that voice was louder than the voice that said, you probably shouldn't eat a burger. Remember, you told yourself you weren't going to eat that burger. You were going to exercise and eat healthier and live a cleaner lifestyle. And then other James comes in and kind of says, don't listen to this guy. He's a prude. Live life to the fullest. You're going to be dead one day. Get pleasure out of every moment if you can. Live life as if this day was your last. Okay, so there's a lot of complex elements in my consciousness, even just at the level of the voices in my head. Which one of those is James? Which one of the 100 voices is James? And that's just the voices. It's not my preferences. It's not my tastes. It's not my levels of attraction. It's not my aggression or my joy. There's so many things that make a person and not some other person. So the point of this rant is to point out that I think writers, like any person, can sometimes over-identify as something. I'm an author, I write novels. Okay, you're probably great at that, and maybe that's the best thing for you to be writing, but you may be limiting your writing ability, your writing reach, and your capacity to make beautiful things by telling yourself you're a specific kind of writer. So if you really want to know what to write, maybe you've been writing for a while. Maybe I'm talking not to the people who can't figure out the first thing to write. Maybe I'm talking now to people more like me who've been writing for years and have boxed themselves into a bit of a hole. For people like me and you, what you should write is unknown to you yet, partly because you haven't written enough kinds of things. This is where experimentation really matters. Experimentation in any sphere of life is partly about figuring out who you are. And I don't think that's any different for creative people and for writers. If you really want to know what kind of writer you are and what kind of work you should be producing, you shouldn't only be producing the stuff you already know you like to produce, the stuff you are already good at producing. You should be writing in as many different forms, genres, and about as many different things as possible, really, if you really want to flesh out your identity and make it as whole as possible, and therefore create a much more complete and varied catalogue as a writer, then start experimenting, try something new. I think we're all guilty of this, of kind of calcifying our identity and pigeonholing ourselves in a way that's really detrimental to our ability to be expansive kinds of people and expansive kinds of artists. And of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that what you should write always moving forward, like your main kind of production, should be something totally different to what you're doing now. It might be that that's just not going to work for you. You're not going to like it. But over time, I think that through experimentation, you develop maybe hybrid versions of your work. In my first text, I had the style of Douglas Adams pretty clearly. Certainly on my first drafts, you could see Douglas and his signature wit, although I'm not as good as he is with his wit, and his irony and his absurdity. It was printed all over my early drafts. My second text, I was reading a lot of John Steinbeck, so I got different kinds of thumbprints on that text. I got some really interesting kind of narrative styles, experimenting with kind of short, punchy sentences and like different vocal meters in my texts, and I kind of boiled down my dialogue to be something a bit more naturalistic perhaps than I did in the first text. And I expect this to happen moving forward as a writer, that my experiments with other people's styles or other forms should bleed into a more organic style of myself that is a growing style. What should I write in the future? What should James Royce Patterson write in the future? It's not what I should write today. What I should write today is whatever hybrid of influences are in my mind now. But there's no reason that has to be the myriad of influences I have in the future. I can expand those and therefore develop a slightly different kind of style. It should still be, well, maybe not should, but it will still be identifiably a James Royce Patterson kind of work. But by experimenting with other forms and genres and themes, that style of that James Royce Patterson style will look a little bit different. It will be a hybrid of that old James Royce Patterson and some new things I'm trying out. As if, if maybe we could look back in our life, at our life's work, and notice 100 different James Royce Pattersons and 100 different, slightly different over time styles of work, so that the first book I write will still be a James Royce Patterson, but it will be noticeably different to the last book I ever write. And this can, I think, even avoid a common problem that I've been thinking about a lot recently, that I think I still need to do a lot of work on, is that artists can get a little bit stale. They end up writing the same thing they've written and trying to juice the orange when it's already been juiced 3 or 4 times with other work, and there's just not that much juice left. You'll notice this, I think, with a lot of musical artists, where their first album is fantastic because they have created a certain kind of style, and they've given themselves a parameter of, let's say, 14 tracks in a single album to explore that style to all of its extremities. To, as I say, juice the orange of all the juice you can get, to explore every element of the design space. Then they get to their second album and they maintain the same style, but now you're working with the same orange and there's just no juice left. You've explored those elements of the design style. Happens in television too, where the second season's much worse than the first season. And often what you'll see is that the characters in the second season often end up like caricatures of themselves. The characters aren't explorations of this organic creative territory anymore. The person has locked themselves into the show being a certain kind of way, with the characters being expressed in certain kinds of ways, and now they're looking backward and emulating themselves, and it looks like a copy of their own work. I think most people will be familiar with this problem, both in television and in music, and probably in other forms, where the first work really catches their attention, it seems really fresh, and it just gets less and less fresh over time. And moving forward, I think a good thing for a writer to do to avoid that issue is to continue to experiment with things so that their second, their third, their fourth text is just not quite the same kind of text as the other texts. It's not going to get so stale that way. I'm wrestling with this myself right now. I am wondering whether my third text is maybe covering the same, more or less the same kind of stylistic choices in terms of setting and environment and feel that my first 2 texts are, and whether or not that's making it a bit stale. I haven't kind of decided yet, and I have some ideas about some new things I want to try that might avoid that problem. But certainly for established writers, I think it's really important for us when we're asking, what should I write? To really start thinking about, what should I write that isn't the same thing I wrote last time? Something different for me and something different for my readers. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thanks so much for hanging around. Please feel free to leave a comment. I love to see comments. I will interact with you if you comment. You can interact with each other in the comments if you like. I really want to turn this into something of a community where we can all express ourselves. It is your story after all, not my story. If you haven't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button below and seek me out on Instagram, and I am doing a little bit of work on TikTok, so you can seek me out there as well if you want to get some of my existing content into your brain to help you develop yourself as a writer. So thanks for being around. We'll see you next time for the next Patterson Story video. Until then, peace out.